Rome. Name alone conjures images of legions marching across continents, gladiators fighting in massive amphitheaters, and emperors ruling over the known world. For over a millennium, Rome dominated the Mediterranean and beyond, creating an empire so vast and influential that its echoes still resonate in our modern world. This is the story of how a small Italian city-state became the greatest empire in ancient history, and how it eventually crumbled under its own weight. The Roman Empire didn't emerge overnight. By the time Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon in 49 BC, Rome had already spent centuries conquering Italy and the Mediterranean. But it was Caesar who would transform Rome from a republic into an empire, setting the stage for both its greatest triumphs and its ultimate downfall. To understand the Roman Empire's rise, we must begin with the man who destroyed the Roman Republic, Gaius Julius Caesar. Born into a patrician family around 100 BC, Caesar grew up in a Rome that was already the dominant power in the Mediterranean, but one torn apart by civil wars and political corruption. Caesar's rise to power began with his formation of the First Triumvirate in 60 BC, an unofficial alliance with Pompey the Great and Marcus Licinius Crassus. This alliance allowed Caesar to secure the consulship and later the governorship of Gaul, modern-day France and Belgium. What followed was 8 years of conquests that would make Caesar's name legendary. The Gallic Wars from 58 to 50 BC saw Caesar conquer territory from the Atlantic to the Rhine River. His commentaries on these wars, written in the third person, provide us with detailed accounts of battles that expanded Roman territory by nearly a third. The conquest of Gaul brought immense wealth to Rome and made Caesar extremely popular with his legions, who had profited greatly from the campaigns. But Caesar's success alarmed the Roman Senate and his former ally Pompey. When the Senate ordered Caesar to disband his armies and return to Rome as a private citizen, Caesar faced a choice that would change history. On January 10, 49 BC, Caesar led his 13th legion across the Rubicon River, the boundary between Gaul and Italy, reportedly declaring, "Alea iacta est," the die is cast. Caesar's civil war against Pompey and the Roman Republic lasted 4 years. Despite being outnumbered, Caesar's veteran legions and his own military genius proved decisive. At the Battle of Pharsalus in 48 BC, Caesar defeated Pompey's larger army, forcing Pompey to flee to Egypt, where he was murdered by agents hoping to curry favor with Caesar. Caesar pursued his enemies across the Mediterranean, fighting campaigns in Egypt, where he famously met Cleopatra, Asia Minor, and North Africa. His victories were so swift that he could boast Veni, Vidi, Vici, I came, I saw, I conquered, after defeating King Pharnaces II at the Battle of Zela in just 5 days. By 45 BC, Caesar had returned to Rome as its undisputed master. He was appointed Dictator Perpetuo, dictator for life, a title that effectively ended the Roman Republic. Caesar implemented sweeping reforms. He reorganized the calendar, creating the Julian calendar still used today, expanded citizenship to people throughout the empire, and began massive public works projects, including the reconstruction of the Forum. But Caesar's accumulation of power alarmed traditionalist senators who saw him as a tyrant destroying Rome's republican traditions. On the Ides of March, March 15, 44 BC, a group of senators led by Marcus Junius Brutus and Gaius Cassius Longinus assassinated Caesar as he entered the Senate House. According to legend, Caesar's last words upon seeing Brutus among the attackers were, "At two, Brutus? And you, Brutus?" Caesar's assassination, intended to restore the Republic, instead plunged Rome into another civil war that would ultimately destroy what remained of the Republican government and establish the Roman Empire under his adopted heir, Octavian. Caesar's death created a power vacuum that 3 men would struggle to fill. Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal lieutenant, Marcus Aemilius Lepidus, Caesar's master of horse, and Octavian, Caesar's 18-year-old adopted son and heir, formed the Second Triumvirate in 43 BC.
Their first act was to hunt down and execute Caesar's assassins and their supporters in a series of proscriptions that claimed thousands of lives, including the great orator Cicero. The triumvirate divided the Roman world among themselves, but this arrangement proved unstable. Lepidus was gradually marginalized, while tensions grew between Antony and Octavian. Antony's alliance and romantic relationship with Cleopatra VII of Egypt provided Octavian with the perfect propaganda tool, portraying Antony as a traitor who had abandoned Roman values for Oriental luxury. The final confrontation came at the Battle of Actium in 31 BC. Octavian's fleet, commanded by Marcus Agrippa, defeated the combined forces of Antony and Cleopatra. Both Antony and Cleopatra committed suicide the following year, leaving Octavian as the sole ruler of the Roman world. In 27 BC, Octavian formally restored the Republic, returning power to the Senate and people of Rome. But this was largely theater. Octavian retained control of the military and the most important provinces, effectively making him emperor in all but name. The Senate granted him the title Augustus, meaning revered one, and this name would become synonymous with imperial power. Augustus ruled for 45 years, from 27 BC to 14 AD, establishing the Principate, a system where the emperor held supreme power while maintaining the facade of republican institutions. His reign, known as the Pax Romana, or Roman peace, ushered in 2 centuries of unprecedented stability and prosperity. Augustus's achievements were monumental. He expanded the empire's borders, adding Egypt, parts of Germany, and the Alpine regions. He created a professional standing army of 28 legions, roughly 150,000 men, supplemented by auxiliary forces. He established the Praetorian Guard to protect the emperor and maintain order in Rome. Perhaps most importantly, Augustus created an efficient imperial administration. He divided provinces between those governed by the Senate and those under his direct control, typically the frontier provinces where military commanders were needed. He established a civil service, built roads and aqueducts, and created a postal system that connected the farthest reaches of the empire. The Augustan age was also a golden age of Roman literature and culture. Poets like Virgil, Ovid, and Horace flourished under imperial patronage. Virgil's Aeneid became Rome's national epic, connecting Roman origins to the fall of Troy and prophesying eternal dominion. Augustus himself claimed to have found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble. When Augustus died in 14 AD, he had transformed Rome from a war-torn republic into a stable empire that would endure for centuries. His political settlement was so successful that it survived even the madness of emperors like Caligula and Nero. Following Augustus, the Julio-Claudian dynasty continued until 68 AD, producing both capable rulers like Tiberius and Claudius and infamous tyrants like Caligula and Nero. Nero's suicide in 68 AD ended the dynasty and triggered the Year of the Four Emperors, a brief civil war that demonstrated the military's role in imperial succession. The Flavian dynasty, beginning with Vespasian in 69 AD, restored stability and began Rome's greatest period of expansion. Vespasian, a practical soldier from a middle-class family, rebuilt Rome's finances and began construction of the Colosseum. His son Titus completed the amphitheater and handled the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 AD that destroyed Pompeii and Herculaneum. But it was under the Antonine dynasty, particularly during the reigns of Trajan and Hadrian, that Rome reached its greatest territorial extent and cultural height. Trajan, who ruled from 98 to 117 AD, was the first emperor born outside Italy, coming from the Roman colony of Italica in Spain. His reign marked the empire's greatest expansion. Trajan's conquest of Dacia, modern-day Romania, between 101 and 106 AD brought vast wealth to Rome from Dacian gold mines. The spoils financed Trajan's Forum, the most magnificent of Rome's public spaces, and his famous column that still stands today depicting scenes from the Dacian Wars. Even more ambitious was Trajan's Parthian campaign from 114 to 117 AD.
Rome's armies pushed beyond the Euphrates, conquering Armenia, Mesopotamia, and briefly reaching the Persian Gulf. For a moment, Rome controlled territory from Scotland to Iraq, from Morocco to Romania, the largest the empire would ever be. Hadrian, Trajan's successor, abandoned the easternmost conquests as impossible to hold, but consolidated what remained. His most famous legacy is Hadrian's Wall, an 84-mile fortification across northern England that marked the empire's northernmost frontier. Hadrian was also a great builder and administrator, rebuilding the Pantheon in Rome and founding cities across the empire. The Antonine period, continuing under Antoninus Pius and Marcus Aurelius, represented the height of Roman civilization. Trade flourished across the Mediterranean and beyond, with Roman merchants reaching India and China via the Silk Road. Roman engineering marvels, like the Pont du Gard aqueduct in France and the Pantheon's massive concrete dome, showcased technological mastery that wouldn't be matched for over a millennium. Roman law during this period developed into a sophisticated system that would influence legal codes worldwide. The concept of natural law, the presumption of innocence, and the right to legal defense all trace their origins to Roman jurisprudence. Urban life in the empire reached unprecedented sophistication. Rome itself housed over 1 million people, making it larger than any city would be again until London in the 19th century. The empire contained perhaps 60 million people, connected by 50,000 miles of roads, and unified by Roman law, administration, and increasingly Roman culture. Yet, even at its height, the empire faced challenges. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor, spent most of his reign fighting Germanic tribes along the Danube frontier. A devastating plague, possibly smallpox, swept through the empire in the 160s AD, killing millions and weakening the military. The cost of maintaining such vast territories was becoming increasingly burdensome. The death of Marcus Aurelius in 180 AD marked the beginning of Rome's long decline. His son Commodus was more interested in gladiatorial games than governing, and his assassination in 192 AD triggered another period of civil war. The Severan dynasty that followed attempted to restore stability through military strength and expanded citizenship, culminating in the Constitutio Antoniniana of 212 AD that granted citizenship to all free inhabitants of the empire. But the Severans also increased military spending dramatically, debasing the currency to pay for larger armies and higher soldier salaries. The real crisis began in 235 AD with the assassination of Alexander Severus. What followed was 50 years of chaos known as the Crisis of the 3rd Century. During this period, the empire nearly collapsed under the weight of multiple simultaneous pressures. Military anarchy plagued the empire as generals fought for the purple. Between 235 and 284 AD, there were over 50 claimants to the imperial throne, most dying violent deaths. This constant warfare devastated the economy and left frontiers undefended. External pressures mounted simultaneously. Germanic tribes, themselves under pressure from movements further east, pressed against the Rhine and Danube frontiers. The Alemanni penetrated into northern Italy, while the Goths ravaged the Balkans and even crossed into Asia Minor. In the east, the new Sassanid Persian Empire proved a formidable opponent, capturing the Emperor Valerian in 260 AD and using his skin as a decoration. Economic collapse accompanied military disaster. Constant warfare required enormous expenditures, leading to currency debasement so severe that by 270 AD, silver coins contained less than 5% silver. Inflation soared, trade collapsed, and many regions reverted to barter economies. The empire literally began to fragment. In the west, the Gallic Empire under Postumus controlled Gaul, Britain, and parts of Spain from 260 to 274 AD. In the east, Queen Zenobia of Palmyra conquered Egypt and much of the eastern Mediterranean, styling herself as a new Cleopatra. Recovery seemed impossible, yet it came through the efforts of a series of military emperors collectively known as the Barracks Emperors. Men like Claudius Gothicus, Aurelian, and Probus gradually restored order through relentless campaigning. Aurelian reunited the empire by defeating both the Gallic Empire and Palmyra, earning the title Restorer of the World.
The crisis of the 3rd century ended with the reign of Diocletian, who became emperor in 284 AD. Recognizing that the empire had become too large for one man to govern effectively, Diocletian instituted the Tetrarchy, rule by 4 emperors. 2 senior emperors, Augusti, and 2 junior emperors, Caesares, would divide responsibility for different regions. Diocletian's reforms were revolutionary. He separated military and civilian commands to prevent generals from accumulating too much power. He reorganized the provinces into smaller, more manageable units. Most significantly, he attempted to fix the economic crisis through the Edict on Maximum Prices in 301 AD, which set maximum prices for goods and services throughout the empire. The military was completely reorganized. Diocletian created a mobile field army, comitatenses, that could respond rapidly to threats, while stationary frontier troops, limitanae, defended the borders. Military service became hereditary, with sons of soldiers required to serve. The army grew to perhaps 650,000 men, the largest in Roman history, but this massive force came at an enormous cost. To fund this expanded military and bureaucracy, Diocletian reformed taxation. The new system was based on land assessment and population, paid primarily in kind rather than debased currency. While more efficient, it was also more oppressive, binding peasants to the land in a system that prefigured medieval serfdom. Diocletian also launched the last major persecution of Christians in 303 AD. Christianity had been growing steadily since the 1st century, appealing particularly to the urban poor and women. Despite periodic persecutions, Christian communities had spread throughout the empire, creating a parallel social structure that often provided better care for the sick and poor than imperial institutions. When Diocletian retired in 305 AD, the first Roman emperor to voluntarily abdicate, his carefully planned succession quickly collapsed into civil war. From this chaos emerged Constantine, who would transform the empire as fundamentally as Augustus had 3 centuries earlier. Constantine's victory at the Battle of Milvian Bridge in 312 AD was attributed to divine intervention. According to legend, Constantine saw a vision of the Christian cross with the words, "In hoc signo vinces," "In this sign you will conquer." Whether sincere conversion or political calculation, Constantine's embrace of Christianity changed the course of Western civilization. The Edict of Milan in 313 AD legalized Christianity throughout the empire, ending centuries of persecution. Constantine went further, actively promoting Christianity through church construction, tax exemptions, and preferential treatment for Christian officials. The Council of Nicaea in 325, convened by Constantine, established Orthodox Christian doctrine and created the Nicene Creed, still recited today. Perhaps Constantine's most lasting legacy was the foundation of Constantinople in 330 AD. Built on the site of the ancient Greek city of Byzantium, Constantinople was designed as a new Rome, a Christian capital for a Christian empire. Strategically located, controlling the Bosphorus Strait between Europe and Asia, Constantinople would outlast Rome itself by over 1,000 years. Constantine also completed Diocletian's administrative reforms while reuniting the empire under single rule. He created a new gold currency, the solidus, which remained stable for centuries. He established a new imperial court ceremony and hierarchy that emphasized the emperor's divine nature and absolute authority. Constantine's successors continued his Christian policies while facing mounting external pressures. The empire's frontiers stretched over 6,000 miles, from Hadrian's Wall in Britain to the Sahara Desert in Africa, from the Atlantic to the Euphrates. Defending such vast borders against increasingly organized barbarian confederations required enormous resources. The barbarians themselves were changing. No longer just raiding parties seeking plunder, many Germanic tribes were entire peoples seeking new homes. Climate change and pressure from nomadic groups further east, particularly the Huns, created massive population movements that historians call the migration period or Völkerwanderung. Rome initially managed these pressures through diplomacy, subsidies, and recruitment. Many barbarians served in Roman armies as foederati, federated allies who fought for Rome in exchange for land and recognition. By the 4th century, barbarian generals like Stilicho and Ricimer wielded enormous influence in the imperial court. The empire's internal structure was also evolving. Christianity became not just legal but dominant, fundamentally altering Roman culture. Pagan temples were closed or converted to churches. The gladiatorial games that had symbolized Roman culture for centuries were gradually abolished. Traditional Roman values of civic duty and military virtue gave way to Christian ideals of humility and otherworldliness. Education and literature reflected these changes. Classical learning persisted but was increasingly Christianized. Church fathers like Jerome, Augustus, and John Chrysostom became the empire's leading intellectuals. The Latin of Cicero and Virgil evolved into the liturgical language of the Church. Economic changes were equally profound. Heavy taxation to support the military and bureaucracy stifled trade and innovation. Currency debasement continued despite Constantine's gold solidus, as silver and bronze coins lost value. Many regions became increasingly self-sufficient, weakening the economic ties that had bound the empire together. Social mobility, once a hallmark of Roman society, declined as occupations became hereditary. Senators were born to senatorial families, soldiers' sons became soldiers, and peasants were bound to the land. The vibrant urban culture that had characterized the High Empire gave way to a more rural, militarized society.
Pressure on the empire led to an increasingly common solution: division. Starting with Diocletian's tetrarchy, the empire was frequently split between multiple rulers. This became permanent after the death of Theodosius II in 395 AD, when the empire was divided between his two young sons, Honorius in the west and Arcadius in the east. The Western and Eastern Roman empires, while nominally parts of the same state, increasingly developed separate identities. The West remained Latin-speaking and faced the brunt of barbarian invasions. The East became increasingly Greek in culture and enjoyed greater stability due to its geographic advantages and wealthier urban centers. Constantinople's position proved crucial. Controlling the Bosphorus, the city commanded trade routes between Europe and Asia. Its walls, completed under Theodosius II, made it virtually impregnable. The Eastern Empire also benefited from having Egypt's grain production and the wealthy cities of Asia Minor and Syria. The division had unintended consequences. Resources that might have been concentrated to meet threats were now split between two courts that sometimes competed with each other. Coordination became difficult, and mutual assistance declined over time.
The 5th century witnessed the transformation of the Western Roman Empire through barbarian settlement and conquest. What began as federations of barbarian allies gradually became independent kingdoms on Roman soil. The Visigoths, originally granted land in southwestern Gaul in 418 AD, expanded their kingdom to include most of Spain. The Vandals, after an epic migration across Gaul and Spain, conquered North Africa and established a maritime empire that threatened Roman shipping. The Franks settled in northern Gaul, the Angles and Saxons in Britain, and the Ostrogoths in Italy. These barbarian kingdoms weren't simply destructive forces. Many barbarian leaders had served in Roman armies and understood Roman administration. They often maintained Roman law for their Roman subjects while governing their own people according to tribal customs. Latin remained the language of administration, and many barbarian kings portrayed themselves as Roman allies or even Roman officials. The sack of Rome by Alaric's Visigoths in 410 AD shocked the civilized world. For 8 centuries, no foreign enemy had entered the Eternal City. The psychological impact was enormous. If Rome itself wasn't safe, what security could the empire offer? Worse followed. Attila the Hun, called the Scourge of God, led devastating campaigns into both the Eastern and Western empires in the 440s and 450s. His invasion of Gaul in 451 AD was stopped only by a coalition of Romans and their barbarian allies at the Battle of the Catalaunian Plains.
Attila's death in 453 AD relieved immediate pressure, but the Hun Empire's collapse sent more Germanic tribes searching for new homes. The final blow came from an unexpected source. The Vandals, now masters of North Africa, had built a powerful navy that controlled the western Mediterranean. In 455 AD, they sailed up the Tiber and sacked Rome itself, carrying off enormous treasure and thousands of captives to North Africa. The last Western Roman emperor, Romulus Augustulus, was deposed in 476 AD by the Germanic chieftain Odoacer, who sent the imperial regalia to Constantinople and ruled Italy as king. This date traditionally marks the fall of the Western Roman Empire, though the transition was more gradual than this simple narrative suggests. While the West fragmented into barbarian kingdoms, the Eastern Roman Empire, increasingly known as the Byzantine Empire, continued for another 1,000 years. The Eastern emperors maintained the claim to be Roman emperors ruling over the entire empire, even as their actual control was limited to the Eastern Mediterranean. Justinian I, who ruled from 527 to 565 AD, attempted to reconquer the West. His general, Belisarius, defeated the Vandals in North Africa and the Ostrogoths in Italy, briefly restoring Roman control over much of the Mediterranean. But these conquests proved temporary and expensive, weakening the empire's defenses against new threats. The Eastern Empire's survival was due to several factors. Constantinople's position made it wealthy from trade and difficult to capture. The empire's Greek-speaking population had deep cultural roots and strong religious identity centered on Orthodox Christianity. The imperial administration, evolved from Diocletian's reforms, proved remarkably durable. Most importantly, the Eastern Empire successfully integrated barbarian settlers and enemies. Unlike the West, where barbarian kingdoms emerged within Roman territory, the East managed to maintain imperial control while accommodating new peoples as citizens rather than federates. The Eastern Empire faced its own crises. The rise of Islam in the 7th century cost the empire its richest provinces. Egypt, Syria, and North Africa fell to Arab armies between 636 and 698 AD. The Slavic invasions of the Balkans fundamentally changed the ethnic composition of southeastern Europe. Yet the empire adapted, developing new military and administrative systems that allowed it to survive until 1453 AD.
The fall of Rome has fascinated historians for over 15 centuries. Edward Gibbon's monumental Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, written in the 18th century, blamed Christianity and barbarian invasions. Modern historians offer more complex explanations involving multiple, interconnected factors. Economic factors played a crucial role. The empire's vast size required enormous military expenditures that strained the tax base. Currency debasement led to inflation and economic instability. The decline of cities reduced the commercial networks that had bound the empire together. Climate change may have reduced agricultural productivity, particularly in marginal areas. Military pressures were relentless. The empire faced threats on multiple frontiers simultaneously. Germanic tribes across the Rhine and Danube, Picts and Scots in Britain, Berbers in North Africa, and Sassanid Persians in the east. The costs of defending such extensive borders eventually exceeded the empire's resources. Political instability undermined effective governance. The frequent civil wars of the 3rd century had lasting effects, creating a precedent for military intervention in politics. The division of the empire, while administratively necessary, reduced the concentration of resources available to meet threats. Social and cultural changes weakened traditional Roman values. The expansion of citizenship to all free inhabitants diluted the meaning of being Roman. Christianity, while providing new sources of unity, also redirected focus from earthly to heavenly concerns. The barbarization of the army meant that Roman military traditions were gradually abandoned. Perhaps most importantly, Rome fell victim to its own success.
The Pax Romana had eliminated the external pressures that had originally forged Roman character and institutions. Prosperity led to complacency, while the very peace that Rome created allowed barbarian tribes to organize more effectively.
Rome's fall wasn't simply destruction, it was transformation. The barbarian kingdoms that emerged on Roman soil preserved many Roman institutions while adapting them to new circumstances. Roman law continued in modified forms. Latin evolved into the Romance languages. Christianity, now thoroughly Romanized, spread throughout Europe. The Frankish kingdom in Gaul would eventually become the Carolingian Empire under Charlemagne, who was crowned Emperor of the Romans by the Pope in 800 AD. The Holy Roman Empire that followed claimed to be Rome's successor, lasting until 1806 AD. In the East, the Byzantine Empire preserved Roman law, administration, and military traditions while developing a distinctly Greek Orthodox Christian culture. When Constantinople finally fell to the Ottoman Turks in 1453 AD, Moscow claimed to be the Third Rome, and Russian Tsars, from Caesar, ruled until 1917. Even today, Rome's influence permeates Western civilization. Our legal systems trace back to Roman law. Our languages derive from Latin. Our architectural styles echo Roman models. Democratic institutions draw inspiration from the Roman Republic. The very concept of empire and the word itself comes from the Latin imperium.
Rome's achievement was unprecedented in scale and duration. For over 5 centuries, the Roman Empire provided peace, prosperity, and cultural unity to the Mediterranean world and beyond. No empire before or since has matched Rome's combination of military power, administrative efficiency, legal sophistication, and cultural influence. Roman engineering marvels still inspire awe. The Pantheon's dome remained the world's largest for over 1,000 years. Roman roads, many still in use today, connected 3 continents. Aqueducts brought fresh water to cities across the empire, enabling urban populations that wouldn't be matched again until the Industrial Revolution. Roman law became the foundation of legal systems worldwide. Concepts like due process, the presumption of innocence, and legal representation trace their origins to Roman jurisprudence. The Code of Justinian, compiled in the 6th century, influenced European law for over a millennium. Latin literature produced works that remain central to Western culture. Virgil's Aeneid, Ovid's Metamorphoses, and the histories of Tacitus and Livy continue to be read and studied. Latin itself became the language of scholarship, science, and religion in Western Europe for over 1,000 years after Rome's fall. Perhaps most importantly, Rome created the idea of universal citizenship and law. While imperfectly realized in practice, the Roman ideal that diverse peoples could unite under common laws and institutions provided a model for later empires and modern democratic states.
Rome's history offers profound lessons about power, governance, and the challenges of maintaining large, diverse political entities. Rome's initial success came from its ability to integrate conquered peoples, turning enemies into citizens and allies. The Roman genius lay not just in military conquest, but in creating institutions that outlasted individual leaders and even the empire itself. Yet Rome's fall demonstrates the difficulties of governing vast territories with pre-modern technology and communication. The empire became too large to govern effectively from a single center, leading to division and eventual fragmentation. Economic pressures from military spending created a vicious cycle where higher taxes weakened the economy that funded the military. The transformation from republic to empire illustrates how political institutions can evolve under pressure. Caesar's crossing of the Rubicon wasn't just the action of an ambitious general. It reflected the Roman Republic's inability to govern a Mediterranean empire with institutions designed for a city-state. Rome's religious evolution from paganism to Christianity shows how empires must adapt to survive. Constantine's embrace of Christianity wasn't just personal conversion, but recognition that the empire needed new sources of legitimacy and unity as traditional Roman values weakened.
Perhaps most relevant today, Rome's experience with barbarian integration offers insights into immigration and cultural change. Rome's greatest strength was its ability to absorb and integrate diverse peoples. When that capacity failed, the empire's unity dissolved.
The Roman Empire's fall marked the end of the ancient world and the beginning of medieval Europe. The unity that Rome had imposed on the Mediterranean was replaced by a patchwork of kingdoms, each developing its own culture and institutions. In other words, Rome never fell. The idea of Rome, of universal law, citizenship, and empire survived in the church, in successor states, and in the imagination of later generations. Every European ruler, from Charlemagne to Napoleon, claimed to be Rome's heir. The United States founding fathers studied Roman history and modeled their republic on Roman precedents. The Roman Empire was not just another ancient state. It was a civilization that created the template for how large, diverse societies could be organized and governed. Its laws, languages, and institutions shaped the development of Europe, the Mediterranean, and, through European expansion, much of the world. When we walk through the ruins of the Colosseum, cross a Roman bridge still in use after 2 millennia, or participate in democratic institutions inspired by Roman models, we're experiencing the continuing influence of an empire that nominally ended over 15 centuries ago. Rome's story is ultimately a human story, of ambition and achievement, of power and corruption, of adaptation and failure. It reminds us that even the mightiest civilizations are temporary, but also that their influence can echo across millennia. The Roman Empire fell, but the idea of Rome lives on, continuing to shape our world in ways both obvious and subtle. In studying Rome's rise and fall, we gain insight not just into ancient history, but into the eternal challenges of power, governance, and human nature. Rome's legacy suggests that while empires may fall, the human capacity for organization, law, and civilization endures, always ready to rise again in new forms adapted to new ages. The Roman Empire was one of humanity's greatest achievements and greatest warnings. Its story continues to resonate because it is ultimately our story, the eternal human struggle to build something lasting in a world of constant change, to unite diverse peoples under common purpose, and to balance the demands of power with the needs of justice. In Rome's triumph and tragedy, we see reflected our own highest aspirations and deepest fears of what we can build and what we might lose.